In a peaceful valley, where the hills roll like slow waves and the air smells like fresh leaves and old wood, there was a small village called Willowmere. It sat beside a silver lake. The water was still and clear, like glass, and the people said it never froze, even in winter. Around the lake grew soft grass and tall, sleepy willows that bent their branches down to touch the water. The village was old. No one remembered when it was built. The houses were made of warm stone and moss-covered roofs. The chimneys always let out little trails of wood smoke, even in the spring. It was the kind of place where people spoke in quiet voices, where nothing ever rushed, and where sleep came easy. At the heart of the village was a stone tower. Not too tall, maybe 3 floors high, but old and round and covered in ivy. It was called the Lantern Keep. Every evening, just before the sun sank behind the hills, someone would climb the stairs and light the great lantern at the top. It wasn't like a lighthouse. There was no sea. The light was gentle, a golden glow that spilled out over the lake and the fields. It didn't blink. It didn't warn ships. It simply glowed. Some said it helped people dream better. Others said it kept the village safe. No one knew where the light came from. They just knew it had always been there. The keeper of the light was a man named Holland. He was old, but not frail. His beard was long and white like snow, and his eyes were kind. He lived alone in a small cottage near the tower, with a gray cat named Wisp and shelves full of strange, quiet books. Holland didn't speak much. He liked listening more than talking. But everyone trusted him. He never missed a night. Not even in storms, not even when he was ill. Each evening, just as the sky turned orange and the birds began to settle, he would walk up the path, key in hand, and open the door of the Lantern Keep. Inside, the tower was cool and dim. The walls were round and smelled of old stone. There were no loud machines, just wood, ropes, and gears, and one great lantern at the very top, made of glass and brass and slow-moving flame. Holland would climb the stairs with slow, steady steps. He'd reach the top, open the lantern door, and light the wick. The flame would bloom, not brightly, but warmly. Soft. Gentle. Golden. And the light would begin to flow, out the tall windows, across the lake, over the trees, down the sleeping hills. Then Holland would sit in the chair beside the lantern, close his eyes, and listen. To the wind. To the soft creak of the tower. To the quiet world below. He would sit there until the stars were bright, and then walk slowly home, his cat waiting at the gate. The villagers didn't need to be told when the light was lit. They felt it. In their windows. In their bones. In the way sleep seemed to come more gently on lantern nights. No one really knew why. They just knew it worked. And they were grateful. Holland had kept the lantern for 43 years. Before him, it was kept by his mother. Before her, his grandfather. And before that, someone named simply Old May, whose name was carved on the inside of the lantern's brass lid. Each keeper had passed down the same promise. Light it with care. Tend it with peace. Never let it burn too fast. And never let it go out. Holland never broke the promise. Each morning, just after sunrise, he would walk back up the tower to check the flame. The lantern always burned low by then, like it was sleepy. He'd clean the glass, check the oil, and wipe the brass with a soft cloth. Then he would whisper to it, not real words, but small sounds like a hum or a sigh. The flame would flicker, as if it understood. Back in his cottage, Holland spent his days in slow rhythm. He brewed tea with dried herbs from his garden, chamomile, lavender, and lemon balm. He read quiet books with faded covers. He sat in the sun with Wisp the cat curled on his lap. Sometimes children from the village would come by. They'd sit in the grass and ask questions. What's inside the lantern? Have you ever fallen asleep in the tower? "Do the stars talk to you?" Holland would smile, and answer softly. "The lantern holds a quiet fire." "Yes, once. And I dreamed of clouds shaped like whales." "The stars don't talk, child. But they listen. And that's just as good." The children always left feeling calm, like they'd been somewhere magical, even if they hadn't gone anywhere at all. The village trusted Holland, but most of them didn't really understand the lantern. They didn't need to. They baked their bread, tended their goats, sewed their clothes, and went to bed knowing that when night fell, the light would be there. One evening, as Holland prepared to light the lantern, something strange happened. Not dangerous. Not loud. Just unusual. As he lit the wick, the flame gave a soft chime. Like a bell made of glass. Then, for a moment, the light turned blue. A soft, pale blue like moonlight on snow. It lasted only a second, and then faded back to gold. Holland blinked. He had never seen that before. He waited. Listened. But the tower was still. The flame burned steady. He sat in the chair beside it, watching the glow spill across the lake, and whispered. "Well then. Something new." That night, Holland dreamed of a bridge made of fog, stretching from the top of the tower out across the sky. The stars stood at the edges like lanterns, and the moon nodded as he passed. He walked that bridge without fear. Step by step. Slow and quiet. The air was full of music, but no instruments. Just the sound of light. He woke just before dawn, with the dream still fresh in his mind. The lantern was still burning. Wisp was sleeping on his chest. And the world, once again, was calm. The days passed slowly in Willowmere, as they always did. The trees were thick with green leaves, and the air smelled like warm bark and wild mint. Bees moved lazily between the flowers. Birds chirped soft songs that never rose too high. And every evening, Holland lit the lantern. He noticed it now, just a hint, that each time he lit the flame, it hummed. Not loudly. Not in a way anyone else would hear. But Holland heard it. A faint tone, like a distant tuning fork, gentle and clear. It was not unpleasant. In fact, it made his chest feel warm. One evening, just before sunset, a stranger came to Willowmere. That was rare. The village was quiet, and few travelers ever wandered this far. The stranger was tall and thin, wearing a long brown cloak and walking with a carved wooden staff. Their face was kind and their eyes curious, the sort of eyes that notice things others miss. They arrived at the tea shop, bought a loaf of honey bread, and asked softly, "Is it true there is a light keeper here? One who tends an old lantern?" The baker nodded. "Aye. Holland. Keeps the light for all of us. You'll find him near the tower." The stranger did not knock or call. They walked the path slowly, admiring the trees, brushing their fingers against the lavender bushes that lined the way. When they reached the tower, they waited at the gate. Holland noticed them, and stepped outside, his cat Wisp following behind. "You've come far," Holland said. "Yes," the stranger replied. "But it's not far if the heart is curious." They both smiled. "Are you the keeper?" the stranger asked. "I am," Holland said. "May I see the lantern?" That was a rare request. Most people were happy to see its glow from a distance. But something about the stranger felt gentle. Patient. Like someone who'd sit for hours just watching the wind move grass. Holland nodded and opened the door. Together, they climbed the winding stairs, slowly, with care. The tower creaked softly, and the stranger ran their fingers along the stone as they walked. At the top, the lantern sat in its place, glowing gold as always. The stranger stepped close, then paused. They didn't touch it. They only looked. After a moment, they whispered, It sings. Holland raised an eyebrow. You hear it too? Yes. Not with ears. With stillness. They stood there together, saying nothing for a long time. Outside the windows, the sky turned purple, and the lake below shimmered with the first touch of starlight. The stranger turned and smiled. Thank you, they said. It is rare to find something this old, this true, still cared for. It's not mine, Holland replied. It belongs to the night. I only tend it. The stranger nodded once, then stepped back down the stairs, leaving Holland alone with the lantern. He watched the flame flicker and felt a sense of peace he couldn't quite name. He didn't know who the stranger was, or where they had come from. But their presence had left something behind. Not an object. Not a message. Just a feeling. Like a wind that stirs the branches of a tree, and then is gone. That night, the lantern glowed a little brighter. And in his dreams, Holland saw a circle of lights, floating gently in the air. Each one a keeper, standing still and quiet, watching over the world. And he knew. He was not the only one. The next morning, Holland sat by his window, a warm cup of chamomile tea in hand and wisp curled at his feet. He looked out across the lake. The surface was still, like glass. A heron stood on one leg near the shore, half asleep, waiting for nothing in particular. The stranger had left before dawn. No footprints. No note. Just the soft memory of their presence. After breakfast, Holland unlocked a small wooden box that sat beneath his bookshelf. Inside was a leather-bound book, smooth with age. The cover had no title, only a brass button to keep it closed. This was the lantern journal, passed down from keeper to keeper. Each had written their thoughts, not as a log of duties, but as gentle reflections. Short entries. Quiet questions. Observations of the lantern's glow, the way the light moved on the lake, or how sleep came easier on misty nights. Holland turned to a fresh page and wrote in careful strokes. Last night, a traveler arrived. They heard the lantern's song, like I do. They left no name, but they left peace behind. The light glows warmer today. The air feels, watched, but gently. Like the stars are closer. He closed the journal and placed it back in the box. Later that day, he walked through the village. Children played by the riverbank, floating wooden boats and catching reeds. An old man napped under a tree with a book half open on his chest. The baker waved, holding out a warm sweet bun wrapped in cloth. Extra sugar this morning, she said with a smile. You've earned it. Every morning is sweet enough, Holland replied, smiling softly. But I thank you all the same. He took the bun and sat on a bench near the edge of the lake, watching the willows sway. Time passed gently in Willowmere. As the sun lowered behind the hills, Holland made his usual walk to the tower. The key turned in the lock with a soft click. The stairs creaked their familiar hello. And the lantern stood ready, its wick trimmed, its glass clean, its flame waiting. He lit it with a single match. The glow filled the chamber, quiet and golden, spilling out across the windows like water in a calm bowl. And just for a moment, a single breath, the flame flickered blue again. Holland did not react. He only whispered. You're listening, aren't you? That night, his dream was different. He stood in a vast, dark hall with floating lights above him, not stars, but orbs. Gentle, golden, and slow-moving. Each one pulsed softly, and in the quiet space between them, he felt something like a heartbeat. Not his. Not the lantern's. Something older. Bigger. Gentle. When he woke, he felt rested. But also curious. What was the lantern, really? Not just a flame. Not just a tower light. There was more to it. But the lantern never asked for questions. only care. Only presence. And that, Holland thought, was enough for now. One evening, just as Holland was locking the tower door after lighting the lantern, he noticed something odd in the air. A faint shimmer. Like sunlight caught on a spider's thread, only there was no sun. And no thread. It hung between two trees, barely visible, swaying gently though there was no wind. He leaned closer, careful not to touch it. It gave off no heat. No sound. But it felt present. He nodded once, as if acknowledging an old friend, and walked home slowly, lantern light guiding his steps. That night, as he sat in his cottage with Wisp curled beside the fireplace, Holland thought of the shimmer. "The world is listening," he murmured to the cat. Or maybe, remembering. Wisp flicked her tail but said nothing, as cats often do when something important has just been spoken aloud. The next day, Holland returned to the shimmer. It was still there, glowing faintly in the morning light. This time, he brought a notebook. He sat beneath it, cross-legged, and watched. For hours, nothing happened. No birds flew near. No leaves fell across it. Only stillness. But slowly, as the sun moved behind the clouds, the shimmer began to ripple, not from wind, but from something else. Something deeper. And then, a sound. Faint. Like a whisper. Not in words, but in tone. A single, clear note, like a soft chime struck once. And Holland understood. This was part of the lantern. Not the flame. Not the tower. But the network of listening it had been part of, maybe for centuries. He wrote in the lantern journal that evening. "There is a thread in the trees. It sings without speaking. I think it is a memory, one not mine, but gently left here. The lantern is not alone in its work. And perhaps, neither am I." That night, the lantern's light shone further than ever before. Villagers looked out their windows and felt comfort they couldn't name. Children fell asleep faster. Old bones ached less. Dreams were easier, warmer. No one asked why. They simply accepted it, like soft rain or birdsong at dawn. In his dream, Holland stood again on the fog bridge in the sky. But this time, he wasn't alone. Shapes stood beside him, not people, not quite. Just outlines of light. Gentle presences. One turned to him and whispered, not in voice, but in thought. The threads awaken when the flame is kept in kindness. And then, like dew burning off in sunlight, the dream faded. He awoke with a steady heart and clear eyes. Outside, the lake was still. The thread shimmered quietly in the trees. And in the tower, the lantern waited, its golden glow ready to begin again. It was a quiet morning when the letter arrived. Not by post. Not by bird. It simply appeared on Holland's doorstep, folded in thick cream paper, tied with a faded green ribbon. There was no name. No seal. Only a soft, earthy smell, like old paper and pressed leaves. He picked it up gently and carried it inside. The paper crackled as he untied the ribbon. The handwriting was slow and neat, the kind that came from someone who wrote with care and never rushed their words. It read, "To the keeper of the light. If you are reading this, then the lantern still burns, and I am grateful. I once sat beside it, as you do now, and tended the flame each night. We do not know each other by name, but we are the same. There are more of us, in more places than you may guess. And soon, you may begin to see them. When the threads shimmer, follow them. You need not walk far, only still your breath, and listen. We are never alone in this work. The light remembers. In peace. A keeper before." Holland read it twice. Then once more. And each time, he felt a quiet stirring, not fear, not urgency, but something like recognition. As if someone had placed a warm hand on his shoulder and said, "Yes. You are part of something." That evening, he lit the lantern as always. But when he sat beside it, he closed his eyes not to rest, but to listen. The flame flickered softly. The gears ticked low and slow. And beyond that, faint, like a ripple across still water, he heard them. Not voices. Not language. But presence. Others. Some near. Some far. Not watching. Not calling. Simply there. And the lantern pulsed, once, like a heartbeat answering another. The next morning, Holland found a second shimmer. This one by the old stone well, near the edge of the willow grove. He followed it, not with steps, but with quiet, letting his breath slow, his mind soften. The thread shimmered once. Then opened. Not physically, it was still there, between trees, glowing softly in the light. But in his mind, he felt a path. Not forward. Not backward. Just outward. Like a door with no handle, gently swinging open. That night, he wrote again in the journal. Another letter came. Not from hands, but from memory. The threads know the way. I think they always did. The lantern is more than flame. It is connection. Soft, silent, sacred. I am listening. He closed the book and looked out at the lake. The light danced on the water. And though he was alone in the tower, he no longer felt lonely. In sleep, he dreamt not of one fog bridge, but of many. Spanning skies. Crossing valleys. Woven between stars. And on each one, a figure, quiet, standing watch, flame in hand. All connected. All still. All glowing softly in the night. For many years, the bell in the center of Willowmere had not been rung. It hung in a small wooden tower near the village square, a wide, open space with smooth stone paths and benches under birch trees. The bell was cast from iron, shaped simply, and engraved with 4 curling leaves along its rim. It was not a bell for alarm. It was a bell for evening, meant to sound once each week at dusk, calling villagers to stillness. To slow their steps, to end their work, to begin the quiet of night. But over time, people had forgotten. Not out of neglect, but because Willowmere had grown so quiet, the bell had felt unnecessary. One afternoon, as Holland walked through the square with his satchel full of dried herbs, he paused beneath the bell tower. He looked up. The bell was covered in soft moss. A bird had built a small nest along its base. And though the rope was worn, it still hung in place. He stood there for a moment, hands gently behind his back, thinking. Then, without a word, he reached up and rang it once. The sound was not loud. Not sharp. It was low and full, a slow, soft tone that hung in the air like mist over the lake. It drifted through the village, across rooftops, past gardens, into homes. People stopped. Not with surprise, but with a kind of recognition, like hearing a song they hadn't thought of in years. Children looked up from their games. Elders paused in their porches. The baker, flour on her sleeves, turned toward the sound and closed her eyes. And when the sound faded, the quiet that followed was deeper than before. That evening, when Holland lit the lantern, it glowed warmer. And the shimmer near the well pulsed softly, not to call, but to answer. He did not step through it. He only nodded, as if bowing to an old friend. That night, in his cottage, Holland sat at his desk, the lantern journal open before him. He wrote. I rang the bell today. Not to remind them, but to remember myself. Evening is not only for rest. It is for listening. To the sky. To the breath between stories. To the light. The lantern knows. It sings better when the village is still. The dream that night was not of bridges, but of footpaths. Worn trails between small houses, glowing faintly. And along those trails, gentle lights moved, slow and steady, carried by hands both old and young. It was not a grand dream. But it was full of peace. And when he woke, Holland felt as though he had walked through a memory not just his own, but shared. A memory held in the roots of the village. In the moss on the bell. In the softness of the lantern's glow. The bell was not rung every evening after that. Only sometimes. Only when the sky felt just right. When the wind was still. When the village needed reminding, not of noise, but of quiet. And each time, the light in the tower seemed to shine a little farther. A little deeper. A little warmer. Once every few years, when the moon was round and silver, and the lake still as glass, the people of Willowmere held the night of small lights. It wasn't a grand festival. There were no fireworks, no loud music, no shouting in the streets. It was a quiet celebration, held not for excitement, but for stillness. For warmth. For remembering the small good things. This year, it was Holland who suggested it. He placed a small notice on the village board beside the bakery. It said simply, "The moon will be full on the third evening from today. Bring a candle. A quiet one. We will gather by the lake. No speeches. No noise. Just light. Let us sit with the night, and listen." That was all. No one signed their name. No one made a plan. But when the third night came, the people arrived. The air was cool and still. Lanterns hung from tree branches, glowing soft yellow and orange. Children carried candles in little glass jars, held gently in both hands like treasure. Some adults carried old lamps, or simple torches, wrapped in cloth to dim the flame. The baker brought honey cakes and spiced cider. The weaver laid out wool blankets for sitting. No one spoke loudly. They smiled. They nodded. They gathered. Holland stood near the edge of the lake, Wisp the cat curled around his feet. He held a small lantern, different from the great one in the tower. This one was made of copper and stained glass, and had belonged to his mother. As the moon rose, he lit it. No speech. No signal. Just light. And slowly, one by one, everyone else did the same. Dozens of small flames flickered into life, warm and low. Not bright enough to wake anything, just soft enough to comfort. They sat in silence, listening to the wind move across the reeds. A few quiet notes of a wooden flute drifted in from the hill, someone playing softly, far away. The lake reflected every light, so the world seemed double. One above, one below. Time slowed. Breath deepened. Heart settled. Holland looked out over the water and felt it, that gentle, golden connection, like threads woven in the quiet. Not all threads were seen. Some were only felt. This night was full of them. Later, as the candles burned low and the people returned to their homes, Holland walked up to the tower one last time. He opened the door and climbed slowly, each step a little quieter than usual. At the top, he lit the great lantern, and for the first time in many years, he smiled before it lit. He knew it would glow. He knew it would sing. And when the flame bloomed, soft and golden, he whispered, "They remember." That night, his dream was not of stars or fog bridges or distant voices. It was of candlelight. Hundreds of them. All gently flickering, across villages, mountains, forests. Each one tended by someone like him. Each one glowing because someone cared enough to keep it alive. When he awoke, the tower was still. The lake was calm. And the light, though unseen in the morning, still hummed in the bones of the world. On a gray morning, when the sky was soft with cloud and the air smelled faintly of rain, Holland sat by his hearth with an old book in his hands. The cover was made of dark leather, worn at the edges. The pages were yellowed and soft, like fabric from years of turning. It was not part of the Lantern Journal. It was a book from his youth, something his mother had given him when he was still learning the paths of light-keeping. On the inside cover, written in careful ink, were her words. To Holland, keeper to be. The light does not need you to be loud. It only needs you to be there. Love, Mother. He turned the pages slowly. They weren't stories. They weren't lessons. They were memories, short pieces from her life as a keeper. There was a night the light flickered blue, and I felt my father's voice in the flame. There was a summer when the lantern stayed warm through a storm no fire should have survived. There was a morning I woke from a dream of wind chimes, and every shimmer thread in the valley was glowing. Holland smiled. He had never known those stories. She had never told him. She had been quiet, like him. The kind of person who spoke in tea, in soft touches, in pauses between thoughts. He had always thought she carried a quiet burden. Now, he realized she had carried quiet beauty, moments too soft for words. That afternoon, he returned to the shimmer near the well. He did not step through. He simply sat beside it, book in his lap, and read aloud. There was a morning I watched the fog roll down from the hills, and it moved like a hand brushing the earth's back. There was a boy who sat in the tower with me and never asked why the flame glowed. He only watched it, and fell asleep. The shimmer pulsed gently with each word, as if the thread itself were listening. Back in the tower that evening, the lantern felt warmer to the touch. Holland lit it slowly, with a steadier hand than usual. He did not speak. But in his mind, he whispered. I remember you now. Thank you for leaving these pieces behind. Thank you for showing me how to see the quiet things. That night, the dream was different again. He stood in a small room with soft shelves and candlelight. Across from him, his mother sat in a rocking chair, stitching something with golden thread. She looked up, smiled, and said, You kept the promise, didn't you? And he nodded. When he woke, the lake was quiet. The sky was soft with light. And though she was gone, Holland felt her presence in the corners of the day, in the way the tea steeped, in the hum of the lantern, in the silence between footsteps. The world had not changed. But he had. And it was enough. Her name was Lena. She was 8 years old, with quiet feet and curious eyes. She lived near the baker's cottage, in a little home with ivy on the windows and a wind chime that rang like soft glass. Most days, Lena played by the river with other children. But some days, especially cloudy ones, she walked alone to the edge of the lantern keep. She never knocked. Never called out. She simply sat on the short stone wall near the tower gate and watched the birds fly past. Holland noticed her, of course. At first, he said nothing. But on the 5th evening she appeared, he brought a second cup of tea and placed it beside her on the wall. Lena looked at it, then at him, then back at the tea. Is it sweet? She asked softly. Only a little, Holland replied. Enough to keep the tongue company. She smiled and took a careful sip. And from then on, she returned almost every day. Sometimes they talked. Why does the lantern always glow the same color? Because some lights don't need to change. Have you ever fallen asleep up there? Once. I dreamed I became the flame. I floated for hours. Do you think lights can dream? Only when someone tends them kindly. Sometimes they just sat. Listening to the breeze. Watching the shimmer thread sway near the trees. One day, as the sun lowered toward the hills, Holland turned to her and asked, Would you like to see the lantern? Her eyes widened, but she didn't speak. She only nodded. He handed her the old brass key. She took it like a treasure, both hands, gentle and still. Together, they walked the spiral stairs. At the top, Holland opened the lantern door. The flame was low, not yet lit for the night. Lena stepped forward and looked at it closely. Then she whispered, barely loud enough to hear. "It feels like it's breathing." Holland lit the wick, and the golden light filled the tower. Lena's eyes shone, not with surprise, but with understanding. As if something inside her had been waiting for this feeling. She didn't speak again until they climbed down. Just before the gate, she turned to Holland and said, "I think I'd like to be a keeper someday." Holland nodded, as if he already knew. The flame listens best to those who speak softly. She smiled, turned, and walked slowly down the path. That night, Holland wrote in the lantern journal. "A child sat with me this week. She does not ask to understand everything. Only enough to wonder. I see the light in her eyes, not a fire, but a readiness. Perhaps, one day, the key will rest in her hand for more than a visit. The lantern never chooses. But it always welcomes." His dream that night was of a field of fireflies, tiny lights, rising slowly into the air. Lena stood among them, her lantern held high, glowing not brightly, but truly. And the flame at the center of the sky pulsed once, like a heart saying yes. The days grew shorter. The wind changed, bringing with it the soft scent of moss and damp stone. Autumn was coming. In the mornings, the windows of the cottages fogged over. The lake became darker, deeper in color, like an old mirror. Leaves floated on the surface, golden and red and brown, quiet boats drifting nowhere. And still, the lantern glowed each night, steady and soft. Lena had begun visiting more often. Not just in the evenings, but in the early hours, when the grass was wet and the sky still pale. She never knocked. She would simply appear, standing by the gate, or waiting at the bench near the willow tree. Holland always had a second cup of tea ready. One morning, before sunrise, she followed him again to the tower. They walked in silence, step by slow step. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of oil and brass. The great lantern sat unlit, waiting. Holland didn't explain what he was doing. He simply worked. He trimmed the wick. He polished the glass. He turned the gears a quarter rotation and wiped away the dust from the base. Lena watched closely. After a while, he turned to her and asked, "Why do you think we clean something that still works?" She tilted her head and thought for a moment. "Because, it matters that we care for it. Not just use it." Holland smiled. "Yes." They sat beside the lantern until the sun began to rise. When the morning light touched the top of the tower, the glass of the lantern shimmered, not with fire, but with memory. Lena leaned forward and whispered, "It remembers us, doesn't it?" Holland nodded. "It remembers every hand that ever lit it." In the weeks that followed, Lena learned without being taught. She noticed the way Holland walked around the tower once before lighting the flame. She saw how he paused before each match, as if asking the night for permission. She listened to the silence, not as emptiness, but as music. She didn't ask for more. She only watched, and learned. One evening, as they prepared to light the lantern together, Holland stepped back. He held out the matchbox to Lena. She looked at it, then at him. He nodded. With small, steady hands, she struck the match. The flame rose. She touched it to the wick. The lantern bloomed with light, not bright, not sudden, just warm. A golden hush filled the chamber. Lena stepped back, holding her breath. Then the lantern hummed, a low, soft tone that echoed like a lullaby in the bones of the tower. She exhaled. That night, Holland wrote in the journal. "She lit the flame tonight. I said nothing. She didn't need words. The light knew her. And she knew it. There is peace in that kind of knowing. He slept soundly. His dream was of the tower, many years from now, its stone smooth and strong. The flame still burned. And Lena stood beside it, older, steadier, watching the light with the same gentle eyes. The lantern was not waiting for change. It was preparing to be carried forward. And now, the path was beginning. The days turned colder. The willow leaves grew thin. The air was sharper in the morning. And smoke curled sooner from the chimneys in town. Inside the lantern keep, the flame glowed the same as always. But Holland felt it, a gentle shift, like a clock nearing the top of its hour. He was not tired. Not ill. Only ready. Not for stopping, but for sharing. One evening, after the lantern was lit and the village bathed in gold, Holland sat down with a fresh sheet of paper and began to write. It was not a letter. Not a journal entry. It was a circle. A small invitation. It said, "To those who have listened, and those who might. I will open the tower 3 evenings from now, when the stars are full and the wind is still. If you have ever wondered about the lantern, or felt its warmth, or dreamed in its light, you are welcome. Bring nothing. Speak softly. Come only if your heart is quiet." He signed it simply. The Keeper. He hung one copy outside the bakery. Another near the village square. And a final one on the gate of the lantern keep. Then he waited. The night came slowly. The sky was clear. The stars hung like slow-burning candles. The wind was gentle and cool. And one by one, people arrived. Some brought children. Some came alone. They stood quietly outside the tower, unsure whether to speak. Holland opened the door and nodded. "Come in. Slowly. Take your time." Inside, the villagers stood around the edges of the circular room. Lena was there too, standing near the base of the stairs, her eyes full of quiet flame. Holland lit the lantern himself that night, not out of duty, but as a final act of invitation. When the light filled the room, the people let out soft breaths. Not in awe. In recognition. Holland turned to them and spoke, not loudly, but clearly. "This light is not mine. It never has been. I was only its caretaker, and soon, others will be. It doesn't need noise. It doesn't need power. Only presence. Attention. Stillness. You don't need to become a keeper. But you can become someone who tends the light, in whatever way you know how." Then he stepped back and let the lantern shine. No music. No speeches. Just the hum of the flame and the breath of a gathered village. After a while, people began to leave, slowly, in pairs or alone, walking into the calm, star-filled night. Lena remained. She stood by the lantern, tracing the rim of the brass base with one finger. "Will it know I'm still learning?" she asked softly. "Yes," Holland said. "The light learns with you." Later, in the journal, he wrote. "They came. They stood in the glow and said nothing. It was enough. A flame shared is never smaller. It only spreads its warmth. The light has many hands now." That night, he dreamed of a single candle passed from person to person, never dimming, never rushed, each pair of hands warming gently around its flame. And when he woke, the sun had not yet risen. But the lantern still glowed softly behind his closed eyes. The sun had just touched the hilltops when Holland handed Lena the brass key. They were standing at the base of the tower. The morning air was cool, with mist rising slowly off the lake. Wisp the cat circled Lena's legs once, then wandered off toward the reeds. Holland said nothing at first. Then, with a quiet breath, he spoke. "Tonight, the light is yours." Lena didn't move. She held the key in both hands and looked at it the way one might look at a map that leads to something ancient and kind. "Are you sure I'm ready?" she asked. "The lantern already knows," Holland replied. The day passed gently. Lena walked the gardens. She fed the birds behind the bakery. She sat by the old bell tower and watched the clouds move like ships through the sky. She was not nervous. Only present. She remembered everything Holland had shown her, not as instructions, but as rhythm. Trim the wick. Wipe the glass. Feel the room breathe before the match is struck. And above all, listen. Evening came quietly. The village windows began to glow, one by one. Chimneys whispered smoke. The sky turned deep violet. Lena stood alone at the tower gate, key in hand. She stepped through. Inside, the tower felt bigger than usual. Not in size, but in stillness. She climbed the spiral stairs with slow feet, each step echoing softly. When she reached the lantern room, she paused. The lantern sat waiting. Silent. Unlit. Completely at peace. She bowed to it, not because anyone had told her to, but because it felt right. Then, she began. She trimmed the wick with steady fingers. Wiped the glass. Checked the hinges. Took one breath. Then struck the match. The flame caught gently, a slow bloom of gold, as quiet as sunrise. And with it came the hum. Not loud. Not sudden. Just a note, low, kind, like a memory returning. Lena smiled and sat beside it, her legs crossed beneath her. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply sat with the light and kept it company. Outside, the villagers noticed nothing unusual, only that the lantern shone a little warmer than usual that night. Some said the sky looked softer. Others said their dreams came sooner. But no one asked why. They only felt it. Holland, sitting in his cottage by the fire, looked out the window once. He saw the glow. He closed his eyes and whispered. "Well done, little flame." In the lantern journal, a new hand wrote. "First watch, completed." The light spoke kindly. Not in words, in warmth. It did not ask me to know everything. Only to be still with it. I think I can do that. Lena, keeper in learning. That night, she dreamed not of bridges or threads or stars. She dreamed of the lantern itself, sleeping beside her like a curled animal, breathing slow, its warmth in time with hers. And when she woke, the world was quiet. And ready. Autumn settled fully over Willowmere. The trees around the lake wore crowns of amber and rust. Leaves fell like soft rain, layering the paths in gold. The tower, nestled near the eastern grove, seemed older now, not from age, but from quiet purpose. And Lena, who now lit the lantern more often than not, moved with a rhythm that felt like it had always belonged to her. One afternoon, as she carried a basket of dried mint and elderflower back from the village apothecary, she paused beneath the tall birch trees at the edge of the path. There, between two trunks, something shimmered. Not bright. Not loud. Just a soft ripple in the air, as if a strand of wind had forgotten to keep moving. She stepped closer. The shimmer swayed gently, almost invisible except when the light caught it just right. Lena tilted her head. It made no sound. It gave off no warmth. But in her chest, she felt a soft pull, like a memory she didn't yet have. She reached out her hand, not to touch, but to greet. And the shimmer pulsed. That evening, she returned to the tower early. The lantern was still asleep. She didn't wake it. Instead, she sat near the great glass window and drew what she'd seen, 2 trees, 1 thread, and the soft wave in the space between. Underneath, she wrote. The shimmer was not calling. It was listening. I think it wanted me to know it was there. Like a hand reaching out, not to pull me, just to be near. They lit the lantern together that night. And as the flame grew, Lena noticed something new. Not in the light, but in the air, a quiet echo, like a distant string being plucked once. The same tone she'd felt in the trees. The same presence. She closed her eyes and let it settle into her. That night, she wrote in the lantern journal. I saw a thread today. Not just with my eyes, but with something else, like the lantern was whispering without using sound. The light isn't just in the tower. It lives between things. Between leaves. Between footsteps. Between questions. And that night, in her dreams, she stood not in the tower, but in the forest. The trees swayed gently, and the shimmer threads hung between them like notes of music too soft to hear. And across from her, half hidden in mist, stood another figure. Small. Quiet. Holding a lantern of their own. They said nothing. But the flame between them danced the same. The next morning, Lena rose before the sun. The lantern still glowed softly from the night before, casting golden shapes on the stone walls of the tower. She didn't speak. She simply sat beside it and listened. There was a new feeling in the stillness. A quiet weight, like the air was full of something unsaid. And in that silence, she remembered the figure from her dream. A child, maybe her age. Holding a lantern. Standing beyond the shimmer. Later that day, she returned to the place between the trees. The shimmer was still there, almost hidden by falling leaves. She sat near it, legs crossed, eyes open but not searching. After a long while, it pulsed. Once. Then again. And in the space between those pulses, she heard something. Not words. Not sound. But presence. Like someone on the other side had taken a breath at the same time she did. She returned each day that week. She never touched the shimmer. She never stepped through. She only sat. Sometimes she drew. Sometimes she hummed. Once, she brought a cup of warm cider and set it down beside the thread, as if offering it to the stillness. And each time, the shimmer responded with the same soft pulse, as if nodding. Holland watched quietly from the tower. He didn't follow her. He didn't question her. But one evening, as they lit the lantern together, he spoke. Not all threads are paths. Some are mirrors. Lena looked up. Mirrors? They show you something you carry inside. But from a distance. So you can see it clearly. Is there someone on the other side? Maybe. Or maybe it's you, just farther along. She nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She didn't need to, not yet. That night, she dreamed again. This time, she stood within the shimmer itself. It was like being inside a slow-moving stream of starlight, calm, cool, endless. And ahead of her, the figure appeared once more. Closer now. They looked like her. Same height. Same eyes. Same softness in the way they held their lantern. They raised a hand, palm outward. Lena did the same. And between them, the two lanterns glowed, not bright, but in perfect harmony. She woke with tears in her eyes. Not from sadness. But from the feeling of being seen. In the journal, she wrote. The shimmer is not a path, not a door. It's a window. A reflection. A quiet meeting between kind lights. I think someone is learning the same things I am, somewhere far away. And the lantern is how we wave to each other across the dusk. Outside, the leaves continued to fall. The wind was soft. And the lantern glowed, unchanged, and yet, somehow, fuller than before. The air had grown colder. Frost began to gather along the edges of windows. The lake held a thin skin of ice in the early mornings. The lantern, high in its tower, glowed with a steadiness that felt ancient and sure. Lena now kept the light most nights. She had learned not through lessons, but through presence. Through sitting, through listening, through simply being near the flame. And Holland, her teacher, had slowly stepped back. Not because he was leaving, but because he no longer needed to stand at the center of the light. One morning, as snow began to fall in soft flakes, Holland handed Lena a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in cloth, was the journal. The same one that had recorded dreams, reflections, and thoughts for so many seasons. Lena looked up at him. "Are you sure?" "It's yours now," Holland said. "The light listens to your words, too." She opened to the first page, yellowed and faded, written in her teacher's hand. "The lantern does not shine for itself. It shines for those who sit with it." She smiled, then gently closed the cover. That evening, Lena lit the lantern alone. Her movements were quiet, practiced. When the flame bloomed, the shimmer threads near the village gently pulsed, not from distance, but from recognition. She sat in the lantern room for a long time. And when the stars had fully taken the sky, she took out the journal and wrote. "The light is steady tonight. It doesn't ask questions. It only keeps breathing. I think that's enough. I saw the figure in my dream again. They smiled this time. Then faded like fog. I'm not afraid to be here alone. The light makes everything quiet." Far below, in his small cottage near the reeds, Holland sat by the fire. Wisp curled beside him. He closed his eyes and saw not the tower, but a child's hands tending the flame. He whispered, "She's ready." The days passed gently. Seasons turned like pages in a soft book. Lena became the keeper. Not all at once. Not by ceremony. But by rhythm. She lit the flame. She walked the threads. She listened. And each night, the village rested under a light that never shouted, only glowed. Years later, on a clear winter night, a new child sat on the stone wall by the tower gate. Small. Quiet. Eyes full of wonder. Lena brought them a cup of tea. Sat beside them. Said nothing. And the circle began again. Because the lantern is not a story with an ending. It is a rhythm. A breath passed from hand to hand. A glow that says, you are not alone. And if you sit long enough. If you breathe slowly. If you listen. You just might hear it, too.